They're making the wrong choices. A damning verdict from the country's most powerful union boss on the current Labour leadership. Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham has told this programme that cutting winter fuel payments is a cruel policy and must be reversed. She's worried that the government's heading for austerity Mark II. I spoke to her earlier. What do you want to hear from Keir Starmer in his leader's speech?
Well, look, I think the priority that I'd like to hear from him is that he's going to reverse the decision on the winter fuel allowance. It's a cruel policy. He needs to reverse it. And I'd like him to say that he's made a misstep and to reverse that policy. I'd also like him to say that we're not going to take this country down austerity Mark II. People voted for change. They need to see change, and he needs to reverse the winter fuel allowance and let people have that £300 they can put their heating on this winter. That is quite a big ask. You're asking him to say, I made a mistake. Party leaders don't do that. Well, look, sometimes people do make mistakes. Leaders, I think, should do that. The reality here is it is a misstep. You've got a situation where the poorest in our society, the first thing that Labour does is take away the winter fuel allowance from the poorest in our society, whilst they leave the most wealthiest people pretty much untouched. The top 50 families in Britain, the most wealthiest families in Britain, are worth £500 billion. £500 billion. That's the same as half of Britain. Why was that not the choice made? Why wasn't the choice made to tax the wealthy? Why would you hit pensioners? It's completely wrong, and they need to reverse it. Well, let me put this to you. Labour's a party of redistribution. You're saying that. Why is it wrong for them to save 300 quid from pensioners, a lot of whom are quite well off? A quarter of pensioners are millionaires, asset millionaires, and save the money to be able to give it to low-paid trade unionists who work in the public sector and are represented by Unite? Well, look, and I think it's a false choice. I mean, who decided that pensioners had to be pitted against workers? Where was that choice ever made? Who said that was a choice that had to be made? The reality is the winter fuel allowance saves around £1.4 billion. It's peanuts, actually, in the greater scheme of things, in terms of what we're talking about. The wealth tax I'm proposing, 1% on the richest 1%, would bring in £25 billion. That would take away the so-called black hole. Job done. We'd have £3 billion left over. Why would you think it was the right thing to do to actually take away the winter fuel allowance? I've got people stopping me and speaking to me in workplaces and high streets saying, what are Labour doing? It's almost jaw-dropping that they've chosen to make this decision. They need to reverse that decision. Actually, some people might ask, by the way, Unite represents workers. Why are you so steamed up about pensioners? Well, look, I represent workers, of course, but in my union, I've also got 100,000 pensioners. We've got a campaigning arm within our union, so actually I represent both. I've got 1 million workers in my union and pensioners. But the reality is the mood music here is that they are taking away from the poorest in our society. Now, and actually, the conversation they're having is walking us, I believe, into austerity Mark II. Nobody wants to see that. Workers don't want to see it, communities don't want to see it, and I can tell you the pensioners don't want to see it either. You've gone a bit further than the winter fuel allowance, and you're calling, in a motion that you've submitted to conference, for the Chancellor to abandon her fiscal rules. But this week, the ONS revealed that our borrowing has now hit 100% of GDP. Surely this is the worst possible moment for the Chancellor to take the corset off and subject us to perhaps having to borrow. Well, look, this is the thing that comes out all of the time in terms of fiscal rules and blinding people with the fiscal rules. They've changed 9 times since 1997. In 1945, Trevor, we had a debt to GDP of over 250%. Yeah, but we fought a war. We fought a war. Well, it was crisis. It was crisis, and we had a debt to GDP of over 250%. And when we came back, and when Labour got in 1945, they didn't say tighten your belts, we've had a war, we've all got to, you know, do a little bit less and with a little bit more. They didn't do anything like that. What they said was we will build. They built the National Health Service. They made sure they put their arms around the working class. We've got a position now where we need to invest for jobs, because if we don't invest for jobs, then we're not going to have the jobs for the future. We need to invest for jobs, and we need money in our crumbling public services. Yes, because the Tories have trashed it. I absolutely agree. This is not of Labour's making, but they are in government now, and when you're in government, you must lead, and that means we have to spend money in the right places. Your other beef is about jobs. Now, Rachel Reeves
Ed Miliband, Keir Starmer are talking about the green transition, moving towards a situation in which more of our energy produced through renewables and so on. What's wrong with what they're saying?
Well, look, the difficulty that you've got at the moment is, yet again, working class communities are paying the price. We are going to end up with these communities being the coal miners of our generation. They've got one side of the equation, which is what they want net zero by certain dates. That's one side of the equation. There is absolutely nothing being done on where are the jobs for the people in these areas. So you take oil and gas. We know 30,000 jobs are being gone by 2030. They will be gone. That's not up for debate. Everybody agrees that. Why aren't we creating the jobs for the future for those people in Scotland? We could be a wind manufacturer powerhouse. We could sell turbines to other parts of Europe, but we haven't done absolutely anything in relation to that. And we cannot have a jobless transition. It's not acceptable for Labour to talk about net zero, but not put in the jobs for the future. I've said to them directly, are they going to say to me that somebody driving an electric bike, delivering a pizza, is that a green job? Is that the jobs they're talking about? We need to have jobs that are commensurate with the jobs in oil and gas, commensurate with the jobs in steel, so that workers and communities are getting a fair deal. I want to see the other half of that equation. I
was struck this week listening to Peter Mandelson, who, by the way, a year ago was on this show, and the two of you, though nobody would put you in the same political bracket, agreed on one thing, that there should be an industrial strategy. And he made an interesting point, which is the government is promoting offshore wind, but we don't make the cables that would bring it ashore. And therefore, we need to have, I guess, an integrated industrial strategy. Are you on the same page as Mandelson on this?
Well, goodness, I mean, I never thought I would be on the same page as Peter Mandelson, but on this particular point, I agree with that. I mean, the reality is, and I'm talking about the industries of the future, you can't say there's jobs for the future and not to find them. You know, we have just said that we've won some projects at an auction in relation to offshore wind, but we're going to go to Denmark in order to build the turbines. Why aren't the turbines being built here?
Let's talk about the place that the government's in, and it's room for manoeuvre politically. One of your sponsored MPs, Diane Abbott, has complained that Keir Starmer promised change. But the main change he's delivered, she says, is to put the Labour Party in the hands of millionaire donors. Do you agree?
Well, look, I think that Britain is better under a Labour government. I absolutely do think that, and I still think that. I think we are better under a Labour government. And let's not forget what we've just come out of. The reason we are in this situation is we've had 14 years of austerity. We've had 14 years of trashing public services. So let's not let the Tories off. I mean, this is their mess. But the thing when you come into leadership is that you need to clean up the mess. And you can't say to everyday people who paid for the 2008 crash, the financial crash that was not of their making, but they paid for it while bankers' bonuses have been given back. We had COVID. Those same low-paid people went out, they dealt with COVID, and they came back and were told, you're not going to get a pay rise. It's completely not acceptable to allow us to go into austerity mark 2 when you have triple the number of billionaires, when you have wealth in the 6th richest economy in the world. Labour should be coming in and saying, those of you at the back of the queue, for the last 14 years, workers and communities, we're going to put you at the front of the queue. And that's what I expect Labour to do.
But I'm asking you, I mean, in fact, you're a generous donor yourself on behalf of your union. But do you agree with Diane Abbott's point that the party seems to be, from her point of view, in the hands of at least one, probably more, millionaire donors, and that's a problem. It's a political problem, perception problem.
Well, I think that they're making the wrong choices. Why they're making the wrong choices, we don't know. We're not in any of the rooms and having those conversations, but they definitely are making the wrong choices. How we've got ourselves into a position where they've made the choice on the winter fuel allowance, I cannot even imagine how that conversation started. I certainly can't imagine how it got agreed. I just don't know who was in that room when that got agreed. So for me, wrong choices are being made, and they need to review and they need to listen. They need to listen to what people are saying. Good people who want Labour to do well are finding it, quite frankly, embarrassing that we are in a situation where we're taking that money off of the poorest in our society, and they need to reverse the decision.
The conversation, a lot of the conversation has been about what people call freebies, gifts, clothes. By the way, has anybody offered to pay for your clothes or sent you Taylor Swift tickets?
No, I mean, you could evidently see I buy my own clothes, so no, absolutely, people haven't done that. I mean,
you always dress immaculately, Sharon.
But when I first took over as General Secretary of Unite, within weeks, the first thing I did was introduce a gifts and hospitality policy. I did it literally one of the first acts that I did. And the reason that I did it was that happens in organisations, it happens evidently in politics. And I wanted to be really clear in my own union, there is no acceptance for that. We do not accept gifts and we do not accept hospitality. We were actually given some tickets to an event and we raffled them through our shop stewards, and one of our shop stewards in Manchester won it. What took his wife, had an absolutely wonderful time. And so I think there are things that you can do to say, look, actually, as an organisation, as a political party, as the House, we're just not accepting this because it can, even if nothing's happening from it, the perception is, why would the gifts be given? And that's obviously a problem.
When your members read about this and look at all of this, the suits, the frocks and so on, what do you think they're feeling?
Well, look, I think on the frocks, since you've mentioned that, I do feel that for Keir Starmer's wife, I think it's pretty unfair, some of what's been levelled at her. She happens to be married to the Prime Minister, and I think it's been unfair. But why I took the decision in Unite, one of the first acts that I did when I went in was to put in a gifts and hospitality policy. The reason I did that is that it can look as though people are paying for favours. I'm sure that's not what's happened. There's no evidence, actually, that that's what's happened. But when you're coming in to say, I'm going to change things, I'm going to lead things, I'm going to make politics different, it is important that you build that up with actions.
Last point, then. The Prime Minister, Chancellor, Deputy Prime Minister have all said they're not going to take these gifts, they're not going to take this kind of money again. I think the question that then arises is, if it's wrong now, it must have been wrong before. Should they give the money back?
Well, look, I think the issue was that, I mean, that's the matter for them, but I think the issue is this seems to be something that goes on in politics. It's the first I'd heard of it, actually. I've never been offered any of these things, nor would I take it. I mean, the reality is it seems to be what's going on. But I think a break should be put on that. There's such distrust with politics. People look at it and think, actually, it's murky. And so what needs to happen is it needs to be above everything. Put in a gifts and hospitality policy across the House so it can't happen in future, and then move on and get on with the serious work of running the country.
Sharon Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.